306 on 105.9 WMAL. My name is Dan Mandis, in for Vince Coglianese. Always appreciate the opportunity. Man, do we have a lot of news this afternoon. Going to get right to it. By the way, the phone number is always 888-630-9625. You can find out more about me and follow me on the socials, if you would, at Dan Mandis Show. I want to talk about the media for a second. One of the things that I'm finding fascinating is that it looks like actual journalism may be breaking out over there at CNN. Yesterday, I played you some audio. You've probably heard it by now if you missed it on yesterday's show as I filled in for Vince. John Berman from CNN holding the Harris campaign's feet to the fire, asking, why are you not speaking to journalists? And that went on for like 2.5, 3 minutes. It was great. And now the same kind of a thing has also happened at CNN, once again with Jim Acosta. I'm going to get to that great audio coming up. But first, I want to point out how the media, they're covering this no tax on tips quite differently. When it was Donald Trump, it was a horrible idea. It was going to destroy our economy. Listen to how this played out.
Because when I get to office, we are going to not charge taxes on tips, people making tips.
This Trump idea is unrealistic.
Tax relief that Donald Trump is promising are actually backdoor ways to give rich people big tax breaks.
Taxes on tips is just kind of silliness.
They're smart enough to know the difference between, as they said, real solutions and wild campaign promises from a convicted felon. The Biden campaign kind of scoffs at this idea as well.
Big speech in Nevada by Kamala Harris, and she came out for no tax on tips.
And eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
Where have I heard that before?
All right, now, you've heard all of these media outlets talking about how this is a terrible idea. No tax on tips, right? It's a terrible idea by a convicted felon, they said, regarding Donald Trump. Listen to how the spin changes when it's Kamala Harris's idea.
This is just one of those economic policies that will go to the heart of doing something directly for people that they can feel.
She had a focus on the middle class, and so eliminating taxes on tips will help people that go to work every day and bust their butts to keep food on the table, clothes on their back.
I mean, obviously what they're trying to illustrate is this difference in coverage. You know, again, Trump says something, it's a terrible idea. Harris touts the same idea, and it's brilliant, right? Not real shocking if you're a student of media manipulation. That's the media for you. That's part of the machine. When you talk about the Democrats, you've got to talk about the machine that is the Democrat Party. And you've got, of course, the Democrats, and you've got the likes of George Soros, and you've got the media, you've got Hollywood, and on it goes. Now, I do love, of all people, believe it or not, Jim Acosta has a guy named Michael Tyler on to talk about a number of things regarding the election, including the fact that, yes, you did have Kamala Harris effectively stealing Donald Trump's idea with no tax on tips.
Michael, let me press you on one thing, though. The Harris campaign is embracing a Trump proposal. Kamala Harris is saying she will fight to end taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers. Trump says that she stole his idea. What do you say to that?
Yeah, listen, again, I would say that there's only one candidate in this race that actually has a track record of standing up and working for working people, and that's Kamala Harris. So, yeah, she supports no taxes on tipped wages for actual service workers, but she also understands what Donald Trump doesn't understand, that that's not enough. That's why we have to increase the federal minimum wage.
Right. So this guy completely forgetting that Donald Trump's tax cuts and his deregulation really did help the economy. I mean, if you'd like to talk about the economy, and yes, Donald Trump had to deal with COVID, so that's got to be baked into the results. But if you want to look at Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and their economy and inflation and all that happened during Joe Biden, Kamala Harris's first term in office, I mean, we can certainly talk about that. Joe Biden, despite the fact that he likes to say that he inherited a 9.3% inflation rate everyone else knows that that happened well into Joe Biden's first term in office and only term in office. And the reason for that is because of the government spending, among other things. And so Michael Tyler is on with Jim Acosta and, in my opinion, completely disregarding not only Donald Trump's tax cuts and, again, deregulation and so forth, but the fact that Kamala Harris wants those Trump tax cuts to go away. Then you throw the cost of things into the mix, and then the American people have even less money. Then you throw in interest rates that are sky high right now due to she and Biden's economic policy. And yes, Kamala Harris does not have a lot to stand on. And how many people, how many of us ended up having to put groceries on our credit cards because back when the interest rates were 9.3%, we had to put those groceries on our credit cards, and we're still trying to dig ourselves out of that hole. If you want to talk about trying to buy a house, we can talk about that as well. Buying a home still really expensive because of those high interest rates. I don't know who this guy Michael Tyler is, but one of the things that I really didn't appreciate in watching this interview is the fact that he is perpetually chuckling at these questions by Jim Acosta. And Jim Acosta, again, one of the things that I talked about yesterday, filling in for Vince, was that it almost feels like the media is some of the White House press corps and the people covering the White House and this election. I feel like they're on the precipice of really getting angry with the Harris campaign because they're disrespecting not only the American people, but also the media itself by not holding interviews and by not holding press conferences. There is a disrespect. And every time Acosta seemed to ask this question on CNN, this guy, Michael Tyler, he's got a chuckle for him. And it's really annoying.
Michael, I'm sure this is not going to be the first time you've heard this question, but the Trump campaign is also going after the vice president for not doing enough interviews, for not holding a press conference. Would it kill you guys to have a press conference? Why hasn't she had a press conference?
Listen, the vice president and Governor Walz have been busy crisscrossing this country.
Why is he laughing? Do you see how frustrating that is? Do you see how annoying that is? He's laughing, and this is a serious matter. I know you think it's serious. I'm sick and tired of these people on the left blowing off their responsibility, because to me, it is a responsibility of helping the American people decide who to vote for. And so I love how Jim Acosta says the Trump campaign is talking about this. No, Jim, you, Jim Acosta, should be all over this. You, Jim Acosta, should be up in arms and pissed off over this. You really should. This isn't just the Trump campaign that should be angry. You should be angry with this. There is a difference, a clear difference, between standing on stage, which is what Kamala Harris is doing, reading a teleprompter, which is what Kamala Harris is doing, pretending to use a voice inflection that clearly isn't you.
And you all helped us win in 2020, and we're going to do it again in 2024.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Kamala, you're not from the South, so just stop it already. It's so silly. And so this guy, Michael Tyler, spokesperson for Kamala Harris, just keeps laughing and chuckling his way through this interview. And I'm not sure which angers me more. The fact that Jim Acosta is saying, well, the Trump campaign is talking about this, and they're calling you out. Jim, you should be calling out the Harris campaign. You should be doing it. Don't put it off on Trump. Stand up for yourself, Jim, because they're making a mockery of you. They are laughing at you, Jim. They are laughing at your questions, Jim Acosta. Not only are they disrespecting the American people, they are disrespecting you. And so Acosta, to his credit, sort of, keeps pushing him.
But Michael, a campaign rally is not a press conference. Do you mind if I cut in? I mean, a campaign rally is not a press conference. Why hasn't she had a press conference? She's the vice president. She can handle the questions. Why not do it?
We absolutely are going to do it. You hear her take questions as she's out on the stump, and she said last week, we're going to be having a sit-down interview here before the end of the month.
Right, and we'll have to see who that interviewer is. My bold prediction, it'll be somebody like Dana Bash or George Stephanopoulos. No real questions, no real follow-ups either. Now, they simply will not meet with the media. It doesn't seem like much of a commitment this guy, Michael Tyler, is making to Jim Acosta.
Michael, but one interview by the end of the month.
This month and throughout the rest of the campaign.
I don't want to belabor this, but one interview before the end of the month. I mean, that's not a lot. I mean, can you commit to a press conference before the end of the month?
We will commit to directly engage with the voters that are actually going to decide this election. And that is going to be complete with rallies, with sit-down interviews, with press conferences, with all the digital assets that we have at our disposal. We are running a campaign that is built to communicate with the voters that are actually going to decide the pathway to 270 electoral votes. We are confident in the plan that we have in place, and we're going to execute on that plan.
In other words, you're not going to really they're not really going to do any real interviews. It's a basement campaign all over again. Because they know that the policies are not on their side. And that's the fact. And they know that Kamala Harris cannot simply handle any questions. And if there was any question about whose side the media is on, I mean, again, I'm blasting Jim Acosta because he's putting it off on the Trump campaign that they're calling out Harris for not doing any interviews. And again, I will say for the 90th time, Jim, this should anger you. You should be angry about this. Now, CNN and other outlets are continuing to cover what happened with the stream with Elon Musk and Donald Trump. And Dana Bash, she is being accused of taking some of the stream, some of this conversation between Donald Trump and Elon Musk way out of context. I want you to listen to this. I want you to listen very closely. Because Dana Bash is, no pun intended, being bashed for what she said about one particular part of the conversation.
I want to play one exchange that was kind of classic. Well, there were a lot of exchanges that were classic Donald Trump, but this one really stuck out to us.
And Nagasaki were bombed, but now they're like full cities again. So it's really not something that, so it's not as scary as people think, basically.
So that was more Elon Musk than Donald Trump talking about, sort of suggesting that what happened almost 80 years ago, I think 80 years ago next year, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, now it's okay. Kind of trying to blow off the impact of that.
I mean, really? Is that, did she listen to the entire conversation? That's not even close to what was said, because it sounds to me like what she's saying is that Trump and Musk, they're saying, well, it's, kind of blowing off the impact of the bombing. And again, that's not even close to what was said. They were talking about how great and safe nuclear energy is, how efficient and safe it is. Again, I want you to listen closely.
People have this fear of nuclear electricity generation, but it's actually one of the safest forms of electricity generation. It's just a huge misunderstanding. If you look at the injuries and deaths, caused by, say, just any kind of mining operation, there's a certain number of injuries and deaths per year. And you compare that to nuclear. Nuclear is actually way better. So it's underrated as an electricity source, and I think it's something that's worth reconsidering. But there's so much regulation that people can't get it done.
All right. So you just heard Elon Musk say there is a fear of nuclear energy. There is a fear of the word nuclear, and they basically say that people don't really understand how safe nuclear energy is.
When you see what happened in Japan, where they say you won't be able to go on the land for about 3,000 years. Did you ever see that? I mean, they say that in 2,000 years, people will start to occupy the land again. You realize it's pretty bad.
No, that's not true.
But you're right about it. It's amazing.
It's actually not that bad. So like after Fukushima happened in Japan, people were asking me in California, are we worried about like a nuclear cloud coming from Japan? I'm like, no, that's crazy. It's not even dangerous in Fukushima. I actually flew there and ate locally grown vegetables on TV to prove it. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed, but now they're like full cities again. So it's not as scary as people think, basically.
Yeah.
But
So they're saying that if you see what happened in Japan, where they were bombed with nuclear weapons, the fear was that it would be uninhabitable for 2,000 years. It's not actually the case. They are cities now. They're actually growing their own vegetables, and they're not diminishing the horror of nuclear weapons, and surely not saying it's okay to nuke cities. They're making the point that it's now safe, and these are thriving cities. And the really frustrating thing about all of this is that the point that Donald Trump was actually making was that he's most worried about nuclear proliferation.
To me, the big problem is the nuclear power. The power of nuclear is so great. There's no longer army tanks going back and forth and shooting at each other. This is a level of destruction and power that nobody's ever seen before.
Right. So now that you have all of that in context, I want to play what Dana Bash said one more time so you can see how much she took that conversation out of context.
I want to play one exchange that was kind of classic. Well, there were a lot of exchanges that were classic Donald Trump, but this one really stuck out to us.
And Nagasaki were bombed, but now they're like full cities again. So it's really not something that, you know. So it's not as scary as people think, basically.
So that was more Elon Musk than Donald Trump talking about, sort of suggesting that what happened almost 80 years ago, I think 80 years ago next year, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, now it's okay. Kind of trying to blow off the impact of that.
I mean, day by day, the mainstream media and the likes of CNN and the networks, they continue to destroy their own credibility. 888-630-WMAL. My name is Dan Mandis, in for Vince Coglianese. 328, Dan Mandis, in for Vince Coglianese. I appreciate you listening. You can always follow me on X at Dan Mandis Show. I'm on Facebook and Instagram as well. Coming up next, what in the world is going on with our economy? EJ Antoni is going to be joining us right here on WMAL. The phone number remains, as always, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. 335, Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese on 105.9. WMAL, you can always follow me on the socials at Dan Mandis Show. You can also, just so you know, I host a morning show in Nashville, Tennessee on Super Talk 99.7 WTN. Always an honor to fill in on the mighty WMAL, where we have right now EJ Antoni joining us, of course, economist at the Heritage Foundation, in-house economist of the Vince Coglianese Show. And EJ, always great to have you on, whether here or on my show in Nashville. How are you?
I'm doing well. Pleasure to talk to you again.
So let me ask you, I find it ironic, and of course everyone knows clearly I'm a conservative, so I'm going to, when I see that the inflation is softening, I'm going to be one of those guys to point out, not to be a Danny Downer, but stuff is still really expensive, like 20% higher than when Donald Trump was in office. That's number one. And number two, let's not forget that this is the administration that brought us 9.3% inflation. I understand that they're trying to call this a victory, and I do get that. But at the same time, we're still spending a lot more on groceries. Put these numbers, the annual consumer inflation dropping to 2.9% back in July. Put these in perspective for us.
Well, I think the biggest piece of perspective we need is to remember that this is cumulative. In other words, the price increase that you see today is on the backs of the price increases we had yesterday. So just because inflation has slowed doesn't mean prices are still going up. It just means they're not going up quite as fast. And again, they're going up on top of prior increases. So how has this impacted? Let's just look at the typical American family. It's basically knocked off the equivalent of $4,000 from their annual income. And that's despite the fact that Americans are actually earning more today on average than they ever have before. The problem is prices have increased so much faster that you have become demonstrably poorer as a result. You are paying the hidden tax of inflation.
And I guess part of my question is that as the American people continue to suffer with what's going on, you do have the Biden administration sort of trying to, spike the football in the end zone. But is there anything that they've specifically done to help ease inflation and really take credit for something that they've done?
Well, they've certainly done a lot to exacerbate inflation. I don't think you can point to anything they've done to ease price increases, however. I mean, look at what they've done in terms of spending, the primary driver of these price increases. If all this administration had done was literally nothing, in other words, allow the one-time emergency COVID measures to expire, you would get rid of 90% of today's budget deficit. The problem is that they took all of those one-time emergency measures and simply replaced them with other spending. A lot of things like these green energy boondoggles, for example. And they passed these nonsensical bills like the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, which was supposed to lower prices, and instead it has increased prices. It was supposed to reduce the deficit by $300 billion, and instead it has added hundreds of billions of dollars to it. So far from doing anything to lower inflation, let alone lower prices, all this administration has done is exactly the opposite: fan the flames of inflation.
Well, EJ, you're absolutely right. I mean, Trump leaves office and Biden comes in with the American Rescue Plan, followed by the Inflation Reduction Act. Even the Biden administration, they had to be prodded, but they had to admit the Inflation Reduction Act was ill-named because that really wasn't what its intention was, and then it was not going to reduce inflation by any stretch of the imagination. And so I do find it interesting that Kamala Harris, on the one hand, she's running around, and I believe this, EJ Antoni, I think this is one of the reasons why she refuses to do interviews, because she's running around America and she's talking about how, admitting that prices are really high, interest rates are high as well, of course, as you know, and she's running around saying that on the one hand, we're going to fix inflation and we're going to fix, prices, we're going to lower prices. But on the other hand, she sort of takes credit, and I'm going to put that in air quotes, takes credit for all that Joe Biden has accomplished. It seems to me, and you and I agree, he is the reason why inflation and prices went up in the first place. So she's got this weird sort of playing to both sides here. You can't have it both ways. You can't, on the one hand, say, hey, we did a great job with the economy, but then on the other hand say, we're going to fix the economy.
Well, why on earth does she keep saying she's going to fix the economy on her first day in office? She's in office right now. Her first day was 3.5 years ago. What do you mean you're going to wait till your first day in office? What are you waiting for? You're there now. Fix it. Except there's nothing to fix when they're the ones causing the problem. Like you pointed out, it was the Biden-Harris administration that pushed all of these trillions upon trillions of dollars of spending, that caused 40-year high inflation, that also pushed up interest rates, that has made Americans demonstrably poorer. And frankly, no matter how much Harris tries to distance herself from Biden's record, I'm sorry, but if you look at Americans' financial lives and how they've been ruined, Kamala's got blood on her hands here. She was the deciding vote. She was the tie-breaking vote in the Senate on 2 of the 3 largest spending bills of this administration. In other words, had she not voted for those pieces of legislation, it would have reduced the overspending by literally trillions of dollars. I'm sorry, but she can't escape blame here.
Has she even, you pay far more attention to the economic stuff than I do, but has she even come out with any kind of an economic plan? I mean, I know that she doesn't have any policy proposals out there. I know that she stole, as you know, stole the no taxes on tips idea from Donald Trump, but she wants to take away the Trump tax cuts. She wants to let them expire, to let them sunset, and a lot of folks, including yours truly, say that she wants to raise taxes, which is exactly what allowing those Trump tax cuts to expire will do.
Right. All of the mainstream media networks all did their own independent analyses of the Trump tax reform with gleeful anticipation that they were going to show that middle income Americans were going to get a tax hike. And instead, they all very sadly had to report exactly the opposite, that middle class Americans all got big tax decreases. The only people who were paying more were high income individuals in high tax states, AKA the Democrat donor class in places like New York, New Jersey, Illinois, and California. So if you do let the Trump tax reform expire, what will happen? Middle America will see tax increases, and the Democrat donor class, again, wealthy individuals, high-income individuals in high-tax states, they're the ones who are going to get a tax decrease. So please tell me who exactly is for the working man in this equation.
EJ Antoni is joining us, economist on the Heritage Foundation, in-house economist of the Vince Coglianese Show. Dan in for Vince on WMAL. I was talking earlier, EJ, I just mentioned it in passing, but one of the real tragedies of the Biden administration is people, and I know firsthand about this, where people had to use their credit cards to buy groceries. People had to use their credit cards to pay the bills. And those people are still swimming in debt. And with, interest rates where they are, it's really a struggle for Americans to be able to dig out of all of that debt. Now, we're hearing that the Fed may be lowering interest rates here in the next couple of weeks.
They very well may. In fact, I think it's actually likely at this point that they will. The problem is that it's not really going to make an appreciable difference in terms of Americans' financial lives, at least not very quickly. And we need relief very, very quickly here for Americans. To put this in perspective, again, American families are now paying for the first time ever over $300 billion a year in credit card interest. Now, these are just finance charges. I'm not talking about paying down outstanding balances. This is literally just interest, and it's just on credit cards. So we're not talking student loans, auto loans, mortgages, and the rest of it. So Americans are really, really hurting today. The monthly mortgage payment on a median price home is 112% higher today than it was when Biden took office. Now, some of that is because home prices have gone up, but a lot of that is because interest rates have gone up so much. The problem is here, if you just start cutting interest rates without reducing the demand for borrowed money, aka you need to bring down the amount of money that government is borrowing, if you don't do those simultaneously, then you're just putting us right back on the roller coaster for another round of inflation next year. And the other big concern is that cutting interest rates, let's say by 1/4 percentage point or even 1/2 percentage point this year, is that going to have an effect on the economy? Well, it'll certainly have an effect on things like equities. So you may see a nice stock market rally going into the election. But in terms of actually a demonstrable increase in something like mortgage rates or bringing down credit card rates from record highs today, it's not going to have much of an impact. So it's not really going to benefit the common man all that much.
Let me ask you this, EJ. So we know that Donald Trump had a far better economy than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We also know that the last, year and a half or so of Donald Trump's presidency was obliterated by COVID. But when you look at and you listen to Donald Trump, and he'll tell you that he's going to fix the economy, he's going to come in and everything's going to be great, everything's going to be fantastic. That's all fine, well, and good. But I want to know from Donald Trump, what exactly is it that he's going to do? Now, in his first term, he cut taxes and he lowered regulation. Is that what his ultimate plan is moving forward if he does get back into the White House?
Well, that's certainly what he's been talking about. One of the really interesting things with this race, it's kind of unique in modern American history, is that you have two candidates who both have essentially more or less done the job, right? They both have executive experience and an executive record to run on. So I don't know if you should so much listen to what the politicians are saying as opposed to watch what they have actually done. So what was the secret to the miracle of the Trump economic boom? What made it such a successful 3 years? It was essentially two different things, and you already said them. It was the reduction in taxes, reforming the tax code, but it was also the regulatory reform. A lot of people miss this, but under the Trump administration, they actually reduced regulatory costs by about $2,000 per household per year. Under the Biden-Harris administration, what have we seen? Exactly the opposite. They have increased regulatory burdens by about $5,000 per family per year. And by the way, those changes to regulatory costs are not even included in the inflation metrics we use. And so if you're wondering, why is it my finances are so much more strained than it would appear by looking at these inflation numbers, a big reason is because they don't tell you the whole story. You are being penalized far more than just the hidden tax of inflation. You are bearing a tremendous regulatory burden under this regime as well.
I think part of what frustrates the American people, I know what frustrates me, is that you you have the media and they'll say, hey, great, inflation numbers are down and, the jobs are up and people are earning more. And, to a lot of these folks, they'll sit here and they'll say, the media will tell you that things are going really well. But then you speak to the Americans who are going to the grocery stores and, CNN and MSNBC, they've got folks on there and they're talking to, economists and all these really smart people that are telling the American people that things are going really well. But then you speak to people at the grocery store and they still can't afford stuff. And so I guess as we wrap this up, EJ, is there any light at the end of the tunnel for those people that are baked into this number that are listening right now and they're listening to us talk? And I guess ultimately their question is going to be, when will prices go down? Is there any light at the end of the tunnel?
In terms of monetary policy, no, I don't think there is. In other words, I don't think the Federal Reserve has anywhere near the discipline it will take to actually reduce the money supply to the point where we get prices back down to where they used to be. Now, that being said, one of the reasons why we did not have the severe inflation a lot of people thought we would during the Obama years, particularly his second term, was the fact that we had the fracking boom, the hydraulic fracturing boom. We had horizontal drilling technology coming online. And so we flooded the market with new production of oil and natural gas. And because energy is such a ubiquitous input across the entire economy, it put downward pressure on prices everywhere. In other words, it offset a lot of the inflationary pressures that were coming about because of all the government overspending at the time. So if you can get essentially a lot of these energy initiatives and energy policy reform across the finish line, that can have a tremendous impact on prices, and it could actually help to bring prices down, not just stop the increase, but actually get us back to where we were.
Well, and EJ, I got 3 words for everybody: drill, baby, drill. Donald Trump has said that quite a bit. I'm reasonably certain that Kamala Harris, although we don't have her economic policy yet on energy production here in America, I think that Donald Trump does have the right idea where we do need to step up our own energy production here in America. Again, we don't know what Kamala Harris wants to do, but EJ, if past history tells us anything, they're going to be hostile towards any domestic oil production, as opposed to Donald Trump, who is the complete opposite.
Well, again, this is where I go back to this idea that both of these candidates have a record on these different issues. We don't even really need to listen to what they're promising because we can just go back and see what they did. You can ask yourself, which of these 2 people opened up Anwar to drilling and which of these 2 closed it off? Which of these 2 green-lighted the Keystone Pipeline and which administration canceled it?
Yep, you're absolutely right. EJ, so much to talk about. Thank you for joining us here on WMAL. Always a pleasure. Economist at the Heritage Foundation, in-house economist at the Vince Coglianese Show. Real quickly, EJ, how can people find you on Twitter?
Oh, best place to find me is there on Twitter. The handle is @RealEJ Antoni.
3:57 right here on 105.9 WMAL. Dan Mandis in for Vince Coglianese. Colin Kaepernick, it would appear, may be returning to the NFL. Are you kidding me, San Diego Chargers? I'm sorry, L.A. Chargers. I'm so old. L.A. Chargers. Colin Kaepernick apparently has been offered a coaching position with the L.A. Chargers. And I guess he's considering it. Chargers coach Jim Harbaugh, the boss there, revealed on Wednesday that he wants the former 49ers star on his staff and that Kaepernick is weighing the offer. Unbelievable. It's 3:57 right here on WMAL.